For 9 years, Vanessa Slavich took a traditional reactive whack-a-mole approach to manage her battle against a rare and aggressive tumor, working with highly specialized doctors in various treatment silos. Frustrated with the outcomes, this year, Slavich is taking a new, more proactive and strategic approach. She's using her career in technology startups as a model for turbocharging her research and treatment options in a unique way, which she describes in a recent post in Substack called The Startup Body: Managing My Healthcare Like a Boss. Hello, everyone. I'm Chitra Ragavan, and this is Techtopia. Vanessa Slavich is taking a strategic approach to combat her rare tumor in collaboration with Pete Kane. He's founder and executive director at Research to the People, a nonprofit biomedical research initiative based in San Francisco. Research to the People helps patients co-lead and direct new research and treatment options for their conditions. The group is creating a bold new model for patient-centric treatment and giving voice to patients who are grappling with rare and complex diseases. Slavich and Kane are both here today to talk about their collaboration and how it represents a milestone for the future of personalized medicine. Vanessa and Pete, welcome to Techtopia.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Vanessa, tell us when and how you first found out about your tumor and what kind of tumor it is.
I found out about it in 2011. I had just started working at Square. It was an early startup back then. And I was actually at my friend's graduation and the chair was hitting my back in a very particular way. And I remember like shifting back and forth and being like, man, this chair sucks. And then my friend looked at my back and she's like, oh, you have a little bump. And I ended up getting a biopsy and they found out it was what's called a desmoid tumor. It's also called aggressive fibromatosis. And it's a rare tumor. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than have this tumor. There's about 900 cases per year in the United States. And it basically is part of my connective tissue. So it's everywhere in my body, but it's considered locally aggressive in that it likely won't show up in my foot or my brain. It'll probably always be somewhere near my back. But in the last 10 years, we haven't found a really effective treatment option.
What was it like, to know that you had a tumor that was rarer than being struck by lightning? That must have been quite a shock.
Yeah, I think, the optimist in me is like, wow, I'm so special and unique. Like, I'm really one of a kind. And then actually at one point, so part of the reason I'm working with Pete now is we've done quite a bit of genetic testing in this time period, and we've never found the traditional molecular markers of a desmoid tumor. So I've had one doctor tell me it looks like a desmoid and smells like a desmoid, but we can't actually prove it's a desmoid. And I even got a biopsy a month ago and they tested again and it came up with the same conclusion. And so there's a possibility that my tumor is like also a rare one in the world of desmoids. And so I could be like one of a kind, which intellectually is like really fascinating. And working with Pete, I told him this week, like the innovation side of this, I love. And it's like, wow, this is so like interesting. And then I'm like, but it really sucks. Like, so I'm really curious about it, but it's also like really pretty overwhelming.
I guess the startup techie geek in you really appreciates it, but at an emotional level, it packs a punch, doesn't it?
For sure.
Now, you've given the tumor a nickname. Tell us how that came about and why you call it what you do.
So my tumor is called Ursula, which is funny because my fiance used to date someone named Ursula. So it's a complex name, but I actually named her a long time ago when I found out that the way desmoid tumors kind of react is that they don't invade in that, like it wouldn't show up in my blood as I was kind of explaining, but they push. And they have tentacles. So there's no, like the idea of like clear margins is kind of nebulous, partly because it's part of the connective tissue. And so it's kind of this like evil thing that's like very hard to die or very hard to kill. And it has tentacles. And so I started getting this image of Ursula from The Little Mermaid. And it just felt fitting. And then after a pretty massive surgery I had in 2018, it came back in 3 places. And so now like Ursula has her little eels and like it's just like the metaphor keeps going. But I actually met another desmoid patient probably 5 years ago and she also named hers Ursula for the same reason. So I feel like it's quite fitting.
That's interesting. Now, it's rare but very aggressive at a local level, and it's not a cancer, right? But it acts like one, and it's typically treated by cancer doctors. What kinds of treatments have you had to date? I mean, this has been going on for a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, like that, as I mentioned, 10 years. So depending who you ask, it'll be classified as cancer or not. As you mentioned, like technically it doesn't metastasize. So in a typical sense, and you wouldn't consider it as cancer, but I had one doctor tell me it's actually worse because it's part of my connective tissue, which is everywhere. And so my treatments, as you mentioned, are all cancer centers. I get treated at UCSF, Ohio State. I'm now being treated at MSK in New York as well. And the treatments I've had today, I've had surgery twice. I've had an operation called HIFU, which is high intensity frequency ultrasound, which they basically hack an MRI bed and shoot laser beams at your back, which I did twice. And then I did 2 months of radiation. I had a really massive surgery in 2018 where they took half my lat out and part of the spinal processes, and then put a big skin graft, basically the size of a sheet of paper, over everything. And then it recurred after that, which then came back in 3 places, and then it pushed through the skin graft. So now I have an open wound. And then since then, I've been on 3 different types of chemotherapy. And we're looking at kind of really interesting, there's a lot of progress in this space. And so we're looking at more like localized chemotherapy options where the same chemo compound could be put directly on the tumor instead of systemically throughout my entire body. So that's like some of the possibilities in the future. But then with research to the people and all these different doctors I'm working with now, we're considering like basically vaccine type technologies and gene therapy. And there's a lot of other like new innovations that could be potential treatments in the future.
So you said in your piece that you were taking a fairly traditional approach to managing your treatment and care, and you likened it to or contrasted it with like hair care. Can you give us that analogy and explain what the change has been in how you manage your care?
So for a long time, I also used to race Ironman triathlons and be super active. And actually, like while I was getting radiation, I did an Ironman. You know, it's like I was just kind of like, cool, like let's go. And so I tried to compartmentalize it, basically put Ursula in a box and live my life. And so I was still working at startups and crazy hours. And I did research in a refugee camp in Tanzania. And you know, at the time I was on chemo and struggling walking and my hair was falling out. So it's like, I've definitely tried to like live my life despite all this happening in the background. And I use the like hair metaphor. Like I have an amazing hairdresser. I've been going to him for almost 10 years. And he's helped me, like basically I go to him and I'm like, hey, like I've actually quite a few times like wanted to look like Taylor Swift. Like I just think her styles have been lovely over the years. And so I'm like, okay, like this photo of Taylor Swift. And then he's like, cool. And then he just like does it, right? And he cuts it, he cleans it, he styles it, like he does everything and I don't have to think about it. And I've wanted that from the medical like doctors and field, in that like I have my oncologist and I just want to go to him and be like, okay, like this is what I'm noticing. And then we talk about the scan and we're like, cool, like this should be your treatment. And like, yeah, great. And that's like what I want, but that is like so far from reality. And this is not a fault of the doctors, right? It's just A, part of the complexity of the system, but B, the way the medical institutions are set up right now and kind of the medical industry, at least in the US, is it's all around silos and specialties. And the patient is the only connection between all these different doctors. And so in one regard, it's really empowering that like I can make decisions and navigate my care, but am I equipped to do that? And like, how do I actually navigate when one specialist is telling me A and another specialist is telling me B? And I'm really trying to get clarity, not consensus. And I think the default is you kind of get into a world of consensus. Well, if 3 out of 4 doctors recommend that I get chemo embolization, then maybe I should get chemo embolization, where in reality, that might not be the best option for me, especially when I don't have data to clarify what that path should be. So we've been flying by blind. It literally feels, you know, like you put your finger in the air and you're like, it feels warm today. You know, it's like, can we measure it? Can I tell you what's the temperature outside? I kind of started with all of my treatment at UCSF with one doctor, and then I went to MD Anderson in Texas and Ohio, and then was kind of triaging decisions, as I mentioned, looking for consensus. And then now it's a totally different approach in that I recognize that I just need to drive the process. And Pete has definitely helped a ton with this mindset and the team at Research of the People. And so instead of like waiting to be told what to do or what my options are, it's like doing a lot of independent research, deciding what data we need, having an independent team. We have weekly stand-ups, et cetera. And so we're kind of like, we have our own actually 3-part strategic plan, and I'm tapping into these different institutions and doctors that align to my plan. And so kind of going back to the hair metaphor, and that like, it's a totally, I'm not going to one doctor or one hairdresser for a plan. I'm coming up with my own and tapping into the resources that I need to execute on it.
So Pete, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you founded Research to the People.
Hi, yeah. So the organization actually had quite a runway to become what we are today. You know, in short, what we're doing right now is working with patients with the most challenging cases where they're in rare cancer or rare disease, and really patients that are like Vanessa, who've been on 9 lines of therapy and still trying to figure out what is going to work for them. And especially in Vanessa's case, it's especially unique because it hasn't been able to be clinically diagnosed as a desmoid tumor. Our program got started in 2017, and back in the early days, we were a community group that was doing a lecture series about how AI is being used in healthcare. And we had just some of the smartest people showing up on a monthly basis to our lecture series in the Bay Area. I was really eager to do more with the wonderful folks who were showing up. So I had the idea to get a data set from like a hospital or something that we could work on as an open source like community project. So I called up the hospitals that I knew and said, hey, do you have any rad data that we can hack on as an AI community group? And every hospital said no. So approximately around the same time, I met Ono Faber, who's now a quite well-known patient and founder in the Bay Area. And Ono had has a rare condition called NF2, neurofibromatosis type 2. He had his tumor sequenced at the Broad Institute, so he had exceptional data for his tumors, and he was dissatisfied with the current clinical options for NF2 and was seeking alternative routes. And so Ono and I decided to host a hackathon where we bring together a bunch of scientists, interdisciplinary scientists across AI, bioinformatics, biology, computational biology, and get everyone in the same room and release his genetic data to the group and see what more could be done, or what new avenues could be presented for Ono and Ono's case.
And so how did that then lead to Research to the People as an organization?
So after the first event, there's 150 people that showed up at Google in San Francisco to work on Ono's case, and the energy in the room, all the cues was more amazing than we could ever have predicted. The energy that it created was phenomenal. Folks were. The passion that the scientists came to the room with, and being able to work with a patient and contribute to a patient case was, it cued us in that we were onto something really important and really, really big. And we, shifted our entire organization to replicate what we had done with Ono for other patients. And the second patient we worked with was actually a participant who helped analyze Ono's tumors in the first case. Bill Passman, he approached me afterwards and said, hey, I have a rare kidney cancer. Can you do the same thing for me? And so we embarked on getting sequencing for Bill's tumors and replicated the same type of event. And since then, we've worked with 2 other patients, so 4 patients in total. And currently we are working with 4 patients in 2021.
So you're working on a small scale, but the results and the model could be broadened out. Do you believe on a large scale?
I believe it can be expanded quite a bit. Whether or not this work can truly scale to the masses is TBD. I think that there's going to be a lot of technology innovation that comes out of our group. You know, frankly, there already has been a lot of technology innovation that has come out of our group, or where our group has been a connecting point for scientists who go on to work on collaborations together, or start, you know, in some cases, start businesses together, startups. I think we're really focused on being low volume and going really deep with one patient versus trying to, you know, tackle a larger space right now.
And what's your background, by the way? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I studied Chinese language and literature at the University of Minnesota. And then I embarked on a long healthcare entrepreneurship journey. Started a number of healthcare startups, started a healthcare technology community based in Minnesota. Then when I got to the Bay Area, I just defaulted to the community building side of what I was interested in, and that's the foundation of this group.
Did you say you started by learning Mandarin? Is that what you said?
yeah, I did. Yeah.
So there's a story here about how you went from Mandarin to healthcare research.
I don't know. You know, I studied Chinese language and literature in school. I mean, I have 3 Chinese adopted sisters, and you know, so it made sense. But in terms of career, I wanted to be in healthcare and technology.
That's great. So how does it work? Say, let's take Vanessa and Ursula, and you know, she's hit a dead end in her treatment, or not entirely satisfied with how it's being managed, how to find the state-of-the-art research because it's such a rare condition. What happens next when Vanessa, you found Pete somehow? How did that happen, and then how did you guys end up deciding to work together?
Yeah, I mean, Vanessa can talk a little bit about how she found out about our organization. The first thing that we do when we have a patient application process, and you know, we recently implemented a system where the new patients to our program are selected by the previous patients that have gone through our program as a committee, because the past patients know exactly what makes a good case and a good patient for our program. You know, we end up working extremely closely with the patients, and in a lot of cases it becomes sort of a full-time position where the patient is, you know, working alongside with us every step of the way.
That's great. Vanessa, how did you find Pete?
It was in December. I was doing some research. I just recognizing that I needed a new approach and kind of what other options were out there. And I read an article about the last case they worked on with a woman named Lila, who was the founder of Samasource. And just hearing about the approach, I was like kind of curious. And then I read their website, and I applied using a Google form, which I remember being like, wow, that's like so interesting for like the medical field. You know, I was like, and then literally it was a Sunday night, and then an hour later, like I got a response being like, yeah, let's like do a call. And I was like, whoa, this is very different, you know, than any other kind of medical experience I've had. And Pete and I had a call, and then we talked about like going on a bike ride when he was in town, and it just felt exciting. And when we started talking, I think one of the things, like Pete's downplaying a bit, but like his strength is really like the interconnection between like understanding how the hospitals work and what the doctor's motivations are and what the patient needs are and what the nonprofits and the funders, like he kind of sits at the intersection of all these different organizations and can translate. And so for me, he's speaking, okay, we're going to do this hackathon. It's going to be open source. We're going to like get more. I'm like, cool. Yeah, got it. Like, yes, all of the above. But then when talking to doctors, it's like, okay, we're going to have a patient deep dive. You know, you're going to have access to like X and X data. We're going to do the sequencing. And so in talking with him, he was speaking my language and kind of understanding where I was at. And I was like, absolutely, this sounds amazing. And I knew that it's just something that I wanted to put my energy towards.
So what does the Goodbye Ursula strategic plan look like, in this new sort of startup scenario with your hackathons and your Slack channels and your weekly stand-ups and you've got a team you've put together? Tell us what it looks like and how it's different, than traditional, sort of relationships with doctors and all of that.
So our team is currently 8 people, and it's cross organization and institutions. And that's just the core kind of working group that we meet weekly and have meetings with all different experts. And then the strategic plan is a 3-part like phased approach. So the first part is shrinking the current tumors and hopefully kind of eliminating to some degree. And then once my back is flat and we have kind of that situation under control, there's going to be a different team of experts that come in to help actually close the wound. And one of the doctors thinks we can actually do it in a way that's cosmetically like appealing, as well as like going to stay closed and resolved. And then the third part is what's our long-term suppression strategy? In the last 5 years, at least, nothing has been able to like stop the growth. Like it'll shrink and they'll go off something or recover from a surgery and then it'll come right back. And so it's been this yo-yo for the last 5 years. And so we need some sort of like systemic treatment modality. Not that I'll necessarily need to be on it forever, but we need to explore what the options are and kind of understand at a root level what's driving the growth, again, because we haven't found the like traditional markers or mutations, which may be there. But if we do find that in the research, then it could point to different clinical trials that I could be part of, for example. So yeah, part 1, shrink, part 2, close, part 3, like long-term strategy. And then there's kind of the core working group, but then we're tapping into different doctors and organizations based on the treatment needs or kind of the different findings at each phase. And so as part of this whole plan, there's collecting all of the data. So we had a big meeting with about 10 doctors on Monday, doctors and scientists working through what is all the data we want to collect, which is about, I think, 15 different kind of sequencing type tests. And then once we get all that together, organizing this hackathon of sorts, or this kind of patient deep dive experience. We're deciding if it's remote or in person, given COVID, and then actually presenting the findings to teams of doctors, including my doctor, to help them navigate decision making and help me find treatment options.
So I'm curious to know, like, what are the biggest obstacles both you and Pete confront in this type of approach? I mean, one thing I'm thinking of, who's paying, right? How do insurance companies react? Is this different in any way? You've got this huge team and, is there, I mean, just tell me, what are the intricacies of getting somebody to pay for this stuff and then other obstacles that you might find? Vanessa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so as part of the program, I haven't actually paid anything yet, which is also quite amazing that Pete's been able to do a lot of this, like bootstrapped. But Pete's working on like a separate kind of longer term fundraising plan for research to the people. But as far as like my data sequencing, we're reaching out to the different companies like Oxford Nanopore to see if they would donate the data. And then in exchange, have like a case study for how the data is used. But then also doing fun things like I work in crypto and we're creating an NFT inspired by Ursula. And so that could potentially help fundraise for not only myself, but for the cohort for research to the people. And so looking at kind of like fun, innovative ways to also bring more awareness to the program, because I do think as this program scales, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people to kind of understand and kind of embody the like patient-led research approach. And so I do want to share this program and all the amazing things that it's already done for me with the broader tech community.
What does the NFT or non-fungible token look like? What is it?
So it's still a work in progress. It's actually her woman's name. The artist's name is Kaishi, and she has some really innovative ideas. So I have a pretty massive scar on my back, and so related to like ecosystems and potentially something related to Ursula. But so it's going to be some sort of like physical body work.
Sounds great. You mentioned your back, and in your piece, I think in your earlier piece about Ursula, the origin story, you talked about how you had massive surgery on your back, and that you really couldn't bear to look at your back for almost a year. So you're very strong and positive, but I see there's this huge emotional component in dealing with an adversary that just won't go away. What's that been like?
Been hard for sure. I've definitely gone through my own like spiritual journey in relation to Ursula, where initially I just wanted to get back to life. And so when I was getting radiation, I was feeling really fatigued and my back was getting like really fiery and the skin was breaking down and it was like emotionally like taxing. And so I planned a funeral for Ursula and it was Little Mermaid themed and we ate fish and it was like, yeah, see ya. And at the time she wasn't gone. She was shrinking. And so it made me feel like had something to celebrate. And so that helped, but that was kind of, I was like, okay, so once you're over, like I just need to get this over and be done with. And over time, I've just kind of moved into acceptance that maybe it's not going to be over. Maybe it'll never be over. I don't know. But grateful for today and grateful for this life and just trying to kind of take it as it comes and not overthink it. And in the process, especially the last 5 years, I've really moved a lot more to acceptance. And I read a book called The Book of Joy with Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama, and they talked about the difference between finding a cure but still being healed. And I may never have a cure, but I can still find healing. And so that's been a big focus for me, is just how do I heal through this process, both physically and mentally and emotionally.
And Pete, I'm sure that one of the big things you offer, in addition to all of your expertise around the healthcare system, is sort of this ability to support patients like Vanessa in their journey as they tackle these very rare conditions.
Yeah, working with patients is incredible. It's Vanessa's been absolutely amazing.
How do you see this potentially in terms of the future and of precision and personalized medicine, at this incredible genetic and molecular level? And where do you think this can lead in the future? Pete, what do you see as your vision for this?
Yeah, it's a really special place in time where we have more data types coming online, especially in the research grade data coming online, and more algorithms being developed to provide personalized insights on this data. And I think the patients like Vanessa and the patients that are sort of more advanced and taking more ownership of their care are really realizing that there's a lot more data out there that you can get. I mean, if you read the research, there's incredible things happening on the research level that just aren't really accessible at the clinical level. The number of cancer patients that aren't getting sequenced is still quite high. And there's one of the biggest things that people should realize is that there's a huge delta between what's available through the clinic in terms of sequencing and what's available at a research level in terms of sequencing and other data generation. So part of the genesis of our program is generating research grade data for a patient and then bringing that data to the researchers who are experts in the data and seeing what more we can uncover and provide insight back to the patient and their doctors.
Vanessa, what do you see as the future, having actually from a patient perspective, having been through all of this?
I think a big part of it is the mindset leading into it, like moving from I go to this doctor or I go to this hospital. I've learned like a lot of things, like the bigger the hospital brand, the more risk adverse they're going to be because they're protecting that brand. And so the best like cancer centers might not actually be the best treatment. And so a big part of it is that you're the one living the reality. And so as the patient, and so you have to advocate for yourself at the end of the day. And it's overwhelming when you are the one like getting treatment and managing all this stuff. Like you need a team around you. That's like literally the only way to do it. And I'm so grateful to Pete and the rest of our team for kind of jumping in. Like Pete's educated me so much on gene sequencing. I watched the docu-series, I read the book. Like I'm like learning so much about this process, and he's definitely helped educate and advocate for me. And in that process, I've been owning more and more of my journey and my kind of own medical care. And I think this is the future. That the reality is it takes a lot of time and energy. And so again, the team is an essential component of that. But if we can get real data, and this is where like the startup and like like data-driven decision making, right? Like data is not the answer. Data is not like everything, right? It's like it's art and science. But right now, in the last 10 years, it's only been art in a way. Like it's like, well, we could try this, we could try that. And there's been no data to kind of justify any decision for my care ever. And so I can be on some chemo for a year and not know if it's going to work. Even the way we measure it, like the MRIs are kind of a broken system too. And so this kind of like patient-centered care where it's like literally about my case and not about some standard norm, like clinically proven doesn't matter when you have a rare disease because it's rare, like the stats don't matter. And so what are my stats? And so I think the future is really driving your own kind of data discovery and bringing a team around and then tapping into the care that you need. And I hope that more people have access to this because it's really, I predict it's going to be a huge game changer in my care.
I was very struck by one of your thoughts in your piece. You say, as this journey continues with no end in sight, I have slowly transitioned towards a mindset of acceptance and love. I attempt to speak positively to Ursula, to check in and see what she needs. I've slowly let go of my suffering and moved to a place where I can mentally and emotionally help others and surround myself internally and externally with joy. And I was just so struck by this idea of being able to speak positively to this incredibly aggressive tumor that's haunting you, and this huge step that you've taken from when you had major surgery, and you were dealing with all of the consequences of that. What advice would you give others of how who are dealing with these situations, of how they can get to the place where you are, of being able to speak positively to a tumor that's endangering them?
If you're familiar with the word equanimity, it's like that still point between effort and ease. And so acceptance, right? Like some people are like, oh, you can't just be accepting and passive, right? And so like there's this, that's kind of like one end of the spectrum, but you also like my initial approach was like, let's get, this is going down, and so it was probably like the other side of that spectrum. And so I've personally found this state of equanimity by going through the range of like acceptance to like full kind of aggression. And I think it is an evolution. There's something called the grief cycle. And when I get like new information, like that the tumor is growing, like I definitely go through my own grief cycle of denial, etc. But then eventually I get to acceptance. And I have a bunch of tools. I play the harmonium, I hike, I bike, I have a community, I cook. Like there's all these things that help bring me and ground me. And then once I can process the reality of this kind of situation or whatever's going on, I move into planning. And that's in December when I reached out to Pete, that's where I was. I was like, okay, I need a plan. And so I think part of it is just recognizing as a patient or as someone who's dealing with something kind of heavy and overwhelming is like, where am I on? Where am I on this grief cycle? Like, because it's overwhelming. And again, right after surgery, I wasn't ready for a plan. And so part of what's helped me is recognizing where I'm at, acknowledging it, moving myself through the cycle. And then once I'm ready to plan, like finding the right people or resources to help me kind of put together what I need to do and kind of move on. But the reality is like, if you got some cancer diagnosis today, like you're probably not going to be ready to engage with research with people tomorrow. It is definitely a journey. So just being kind to yourself and knowing that you might just be in the cycle and you might be in this process, and finding whatever tools help you lift out of that cycle so that then you can find the people who can really make a difference for you.
That's amazing. And you even managed to run a half marathon last March in the middle of all of this. I don't know how you pulled that off.
That was amazing. It was actually March 1st, so it was right before the shutdown. So I'm so grateful I did it. And I was on chemo at the time, and I ran 8:30 pace, which I was pretty proud of. And yeah, it was my first big run post-surgery, and it felt like a huge accomplishment, just getting back out there and training with my good friend Ariel, waking up every day and just seeing what the body is capable of.
Physical and symbolic.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Pete, do you have any closing thoughts on this journey that patients like Vanessa are going through and on your efforts to try to help them?
The program that we've put together is really is really possible because of the huge the huge biotech influence in the Bay Area and the universities here. And none of what we would have done, none of what we've built and how we've worked with patients would be possible without an incredible number of industry and academic partners, and just all the scientists willing to dedicate their time to a patient case. So I think I like to default to their accomplishments and the patients versus our program. I really just feel like a connector in between the two spaces.
And you have some really important strategic partnerships, both completed and underway as well, with some of these major healthcare institutions and academic institutions as well.
Yes, we're excited to make some announcements soon.
That's great. Well, Vanessa and Pete, thank you so much for joining me today and for this great conversation.
Thank you, Chitra.
Thank you so much.
Vanessa Slavich is head of community for Cello, an open source platform making financial tools accessible to anyone with a mobile phone. Slavich is taking an innovative and strategic approach to combat her rare and aggressive tumor. You can read about her efforts in her fascinating new post in Substack called The Startup Body: Managing My Health Like a Boss. And don't miss Vanessa's original story about her battle with the tumor, which she's nicknamed Ursula, also in Substack and titled Ursula, the Tumor Origin Story. You can follow Vanessa on Substack under Vanessa Slavich. Pete Kane is founder and executive director at Research to the People, a nonprofit biomedical research initiative based in San Francisco. Research to the People helps patients co-lead and direct new research and treatment options for their conditions. The group is creating a bold new model for patient-centric treatment and giving voice to patients who are grappling with rare and complex diseases. This is Techtopia. I'm Chitra Ragavan. Techtopia is a podcast from Good Story, an advisory firm helping technology startups with brand strategy, positioning, and narrative. Our producer is Jeremy Kaur, founder and CEO of Executive Podcasting Solutions, with production assistance from Kate Cruz. Our creative advisor is Adi Wineland, and our research and logistics lead is Sarah Muller. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. And if you like the show, please rate it 5 stars, leave a review, and do recommend it to your friends, family, and colleagues. For questions, comments, and transcripts, please visit our website at goodstory.io or send us an email at podcast@goodstory.io. Join us next week for another episode of Techtopia. I'll see you then.